I got a new 4K UHD Criterion release to talk about today. It's been a little while since we discussed a Criterion release. Now I got this one, The Wages of Fear, off of the Criterion website directly. They had a 50% off sale, and I snagged this. Also snagged this t-shirt, which I've been thinking about getting for a while. Now this t-shirt, of course, has the Criterion C on it, and it's a kind of a subtle t-shirt. I like this because you can walk around out in public and no one will really know what it is, except for people like you and me. In this 1951 French masterpiece, Wages of Fear, in this film, it's about four men who have to take 2 trucks full of nitroglycerin across some very, very shoddy dirt and gravel roads in order to put out a fire started from some oil. And so it's a very tense film, and it's a very iconic film. We're going to talk about the story of this film here in just a minute. We're also going to talk about the new 4K transfer. We're going to talk about, eventually going to crack open this thing. I'm going to show you the booklet and the disc inside, and at the very end I'm going to rank this film on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. If you do me a favor, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to my channel. I'm Dave Watkins, Watkins Films. Now, many of you will probably recognize this story, or some of you may, because it is the same story as the 1977 film Sorcerer, directed by William Friedkin and starring Roy Schneider. But this film is kind of it is a remake. Sorcerer is a remake of The Wages of Fear. But a lot of people don't know that. Now, Criterion has announced a brand new 4K restoration of Sorcerer. I think it's coming out in the next few months. And that should be a pretty impressive uptick in quality from this to that. I may end up getting it. I guess I'll eventually probably get it, but especially if there's like some kind of half-off sale. I like to try to get these 4Ks at around $24 on the Criterion. That seems to be about the lowest that they go down. Sorcerer is, now in comparison, I've seen both films, and they both kind of follow the same plot structure. One thing that happens odd in both of the movies, now the first probably 45 minutes of both of them they set up the characters, the setting, and kind of like the plot before getting into the meat and potatoes of the film, which is these guys driving these trucks full of nitroglycerin across these gravel roads. Now, nitroglycerin, for those who don't know, it is the substance that dynamite is in. Basically, dynamite's made out of nitroglycerin. It's very explosive. I think a very good example of how dangerous this is, if you've seen the show Lost during the last one of the last few episodes of the first season. There's a character played by Daniel Roebuck who has the dynamite, and he's like a teacher, and he's telling everybody how dangerous it is. And as he's talking about it, it explodes, and it explodes him. And I think to me that was a very like, holy crap, this dynamite is a lot more dangerous than you would think. Because before that, a lot of times in most films it's used in westerns, and people kind of handle it haphazardly, but you don't see them just randomly getting exploded like that. But it's a very dangerous thing for these guys to be doing. They're driving over these very dangerous roads to begin with, that are almost too dangerous to drive on to begin with. Plus, on top of that, they got this nitroglycerin in the back of the truck. Something like a rock could fall and hit the truck, or hit one of the nitroglycerin cans, and the whole thing could explode. This is a black and white 1951 film. It is a French film. It is mostly done in a French foreign language. Not that has anything to do with the transfer, but just so while you're watching it, you do have these caveats that you might not be able to handle. It also is shot in kind of 4:3, where you got black bars on the side. So it's black and white, bars on the side, and they speak in different languages for the most part. Now there is some English in here, like the Americans who run the oil company. They do speak English, and when it happens, it's a little jarring because you're reading the subtitles, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you're like, where did the subtitles go? And then you realize, or at least I realized, like, wait a minute, they're actually speaking English, and I can understand what they're saying. So that did happen a few times during the film, but most of the dialogue, I believe, is French. There's also some other languages mixed in there as well. Now, this is a new 4K UHD transfer. Now, the film, this film is a fairly popular film, and it has been taken care of. This has had a restoration. It's had several of them. Now, you can still see the film grain and all that, but this thing has been cleaned up. You don't see a lot of imperfections in the quality of it. It looks fairly sharp and pretty clean throughout. It has an SDR, which is a standard dynamic range instead of your HDR. Now, sometimes that might not matter so much because it is black and white, because most of the time HDR deals with color, but it also deals with contrast, and it can help with the black levels. Now, I did compare it to another. Now, this is another Criterion release. I did a video on Double Indemnity, and you can check that out. And I'll put a link to this in the comments below. But this one does have an HDR grading to it, and I did look at this in comparison to The Wages of Fear. This looks a lot better. The blacks are much deeper, and it just kind of brings out, even though it doesn't bring out HDR colors, but everything just looks a lot more. It looks richer to me. But then again, Double Indemnity is a film noir film, and it was lit a lot differently than Wages of Fear, because it has some dark lighting at night, sometimes when they're driving the trucks, but for the most part, it's a lot of it's exterior day, and it doesn't have the film noir lighting. But I bet you if this had an HDR added to it, it would make the blacks look deeper, and you'd see more shadow detail and things of that nature. Not that it looks bad. Now, I did compare. There was a Blu-ray disc in here and a 4K. I did look at both of them. I didn't see a lot of difference. But as far as the way that the film is presented, I think it looks and sounds terrific, especially from a film from 1951. It has been taken very good care of. Very interesting story here, and you got these guys in this town. It's called Las Piedras. I'm hoping I'm probably not pronouncing that right. And by the way, the director here is a French director, and I'm definitely going to mispronounce this, but I'm going to try my best. Henri-Georges Clouzot, and he also directed Les Diaboliques. But this is probably his most well-known film, and he does a terrific job. Very interesting character study for four men who are like most of the four men are fairly unlikable, and it's also funny. The main guy's name is Mario, and then his roommate, who's one of the other four guys that goes with the trucks, his name's Luigi. So it's kind of like pre-Mario and Luigi from the Mario Brothers here, but they're not actually brothers. But if you look at Luigi, he actually looks like a combination of the Mario and Luigi from the games. He's got the Mario hat, and then he's got the black mustache like Luigi. It's kind of a combination of the two of them. Mario doesn't look like either one. Maybe a little bit like Luigi, but mostly not like either one of them. And sometimes he wears this kind of weird bandana around his neck in the earlier part of the film. But that Mario character, who is the protagonist or the main character, is a very unlikable character for some reason, which it may detract some people from enjoying the film. But he seems like he's maybe set up as a hero, and he is a hero in some senses, but he is also very, I guess he's kind of a playboy character, but they're hanging around. All these men, there's a lot of them hanging around. They call them tramps for the most part. But they're hanging around this very poor town that they can't get out of. They're kind of stuck there. The only way out is through plane, and none of them can afford to get on a plane and get out. So they're trying to looking for jobs, and there's no jobs other than with the oil company, and none of them can get with the oil company because the oil company is a union, and you have to be in the union to be able to work for the oil company. So it's kind of a catch-22 for these guys. They came there trying to get some work, but now they're stuck there because they don't have enough money to leave. Now they frequently hang around a cantina where people are drinking or whatever. And there's a woman there named Linda who's really loves Mario, and he treats her kind of bad. But that's probably the only way he's able to keep her liking him so much. And like sometimes it's like this with you see this happening with women a lot of times, is like guys treat them like dirt, and then they're even more loyal to them than you would expect. Here, the first time you see her, she's on the floor cleaning up stuff, and then she comes over to him like a dog, and he pets her like a dog, but he treats her pretty bad, and she's in love with him. But it's basically he's kind of like that throughout the film. He doesn't seem. He gets this job done because they hire these guys as truckers, and another thing. Now they do kind of present the Americans a little bit in a bad light which is probably true. But they could have done it worse than what they do. If they didn't, because the guy everything that they do makes sense because they have to do it a certain way what they're doing these oil companies. But the way that they've come in here and they're mining oil out from these towns, and it's kind of like a Western towns where they've had to build up this town in order to accommodate these Western people. But the people in the actual town itself are suffering a lot because they're not really benefiting that much from the oil jobs. But those guys, so the fire breaks out, the oil fire, which is pretty far away from the town, and they got roads between them, but they're very treacherous roads. And so after the fire, they can't send their unionized workers because it's too dangerous. So they they try to hire some guys in town. Now, everyone in town is set up. They really need money. They give them, it's like $2,000, but $2,000 is clearly worth a lot more than $2,000 now. But on top of that, it means a new life for them. That means they can get out of town because if they can get out of this town, they're going to be in a lot better shape than when they are in it. So basically they give them like, then they have to compete. So they use a lot of psychological tactics to get these guys to agree to do this. So they have to compete in order to get the job. So then they compete to get you end up with 4 guys. Mario and Luigi's 2 of them. Now Luigi's, I didn't mention him yet, but Luigi's, of the 4 guys, he's probably the most likable, and he's a very, very he's a very nice guy. He's a very jovial. He's got a very jovial personality. Of course, Mario treats him like trash as well. But he's that character. Luigi's actually been diagnosed with some kind of he's a hard worker. He's been doing cement stuff for the oil company, cement blocks, and he's inhaled so much cement it's down in his lungs, and he's probably going to die from it. The other 2 guys, one of them's named Bimba. He's got blonde hair. You think he's German, and he doesn't. You see him a little bit throughout the beginning part of the film. You don't see him less than the other guys, but he ends up being a very capable person as far as the person to be on this type of trip, and he ends up being very resourceful. But again, you see him hanging around, and he kind of sticks out because he looks different than most of the other people there. But he doesn't really get like a lot of screen time until later on once they start driving the trucks. And the last guy, who is named Joe, and he seems to be like an old gangster, or he seems to be very well connected. The guy shows up in town. He comes in a car, but then he also can't find work, and Mario becomes kind of his friend, and he wants to hang out with him all the time. That's what they just hang out and then they kind of pick fights and stuff before they get offered the job. But the Joe character goes to the army guy. I mean, not the army, the oil guy who he used to know. And he tries to get a job with him, and he said, we can't hire you because it's union or whatever. We can't do it. But then later on when they start to assign the trucks, and this guy Joe he's an older guy, but he seems probably the braver, more capable person. But he all falls apart once they get into the job. But he actually forces his way into, because they pick 4 guys, and he somehow intimidates the 4th guy not to come along. And this is done a lot more dramatically in the Sorcerer movie, because it doesn't really show this here, but he just shows up and he's able to go. But that guy, Joe, he seems like he's the bravest, but he ends up being the weak link as they're going, and he actually doesn't help much. He becomes very scared. Now this movie is called Wages of Fear because it is sort of, you have to be able to live with fear and not let it get the best of you in order to do a job like this. As you're driving these nitroglycerin trucks across, they can explode at any minute. And at one point, something like that does happen. I'm not going to say exactly what that happens like that, but something like that does happen. But this, they go across, during the course of the film, they go across various obstacles. Like a boulder in the middle of the road is probably the biggest one. Something similar happens in Sorcerer. Like this part on the back here, on the cover here, where it shows this truck having to back over this platform. That's one of the other obstacles that happens, and they have to deal with each other and the drama between the 4 men. And they do a good job of just kind of showcasing the human condition with showing these 4 men and what they have to do in order to, when they put them in a very bad situation of this poverty situation, trying to get out, and what they would and wouldn't do in order to get out of it. And so it's actually a fairly provoking film in a way, the way that it deals with these characters, very, very thought-provoking film. And I think that it's quite amazing when it comes down to that type of thought. Now, whether or not like a mainstream audience would enjoy this film, probably not. I put it on. My wife was in the room. She's like, "Man, this thing is boring. I can't handle it." You know. But yeah. So, so most people. I mean, I don't know about most people. A lot of people are probably not going to be able to appreciate this film just because of the slow pacing, especially in the first half of the film. But it is a very tense film once it gets into the truck driving part. I actually like the beginning of it. I like all the setup in the town and seeing the characters and the way that their petty arguments with each other. It's a very, very interesting thing, the way that shows people acting like in these sort of situations. Some of you may be asking this question: is the film better than Sorcerer? Now that's a hard question to answer. I think both of the films have aspects that are better in one film than the other. I do like the setup better in this one. You can't. This is the original, so it's kind of hard to say. Like, so maybe they may have done some of the scenes a little better in Sorcerer, but this is the original. So I like both the films. I would say probably Wages of Fear is probably better than Sorcerer, even though Sorcerer does have this rope bridge scene, which is quite captivating. All right, so let's take a quick peek at this here release. So I did manage to get the sticker back on here. It's hardly hanging on at all, but on the inside of it, we have 2 discs. We got a 4K and a Blu-ray, and there is also a booklet. The Wages of Fear. And there's Joe, the older guy who's a gangster. There is Mario. As you can see, he looks nothing like Mario from the game. And there's a lot of essays in here. There's one of the trucks with the explosives. There's a lot of essays in here and some writings about the film. It's there's Mario again. There's some interviews in here from people who are familiar with it. So, and there's Mario and Linda. I'm going to go ahead and rate the movie on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. I'm going to rate this French masterpiece, classic masterpiece. I'm going to give it 4.5 stars. Now, some people might think this film to be a little boring, and they might not like the other things I talked about earlier. But I think it's quite fascinating. It's a very compelling story, and some unexpected things with the characters, especially as they get further into the journey. And it's called Wages of Fear. Like, they're basically working for fear, something to that nature. There's actually some dialogue within the film when one of the characters mentions they're paying us. What you don't understand, they're paying us to be afraid. Now, they're really not. The company could give a shit one way or the other whether they're afraid or not. They're paying them to get that nitroglycerin across these mountain roads so they don't have to do it. Now, they don't care whether they're afraid or not, but they know these characters basically are taking the money to be afraid and to basically try to be careful, but hopefully get this. It could be called Wages of Death, if it's something like that. But I'm going to give Criterion a 4-star rating for this. I think they did a terrific work. The film looks great. It sounds great. It could have used a little HDR maybe, but but as far as the case is very standard Criterion release, which works fine for this film. And now, if you would do me a favor and go ahead and like this video and subscribe to my channel. I'm Dave Watkins. Thanks for watching.